welcome to Zuk's Off-Road. Today we're showing you what EFI harness is for the second generation TBI. What I do is I lay out the harness here. I'm going to go over a little bit with you, branch by branch, and then I'm going to talk to you about what you don't cut off. So typically you'd see that with a whole bunch of tape on it. We've already removed that tape to speed up the process. This wire right here is where I'm going to start. This is the blue and orange wire for the power steering idle up. I only make harnesses one way, so I never disconnect that wire. We'll come back and cut everything else off of that. Over here, what we're going to have is the coil pack, the O2 sensor, the igniter, things like that. Some ground wires that I always like to use because the factory does it a certain way I like to. So we're going to individually do that. This is very important. What's in my hand right here. These are both the ECU connectors, and then we've got the main relay and the fuel pump relay. The fuse block I keep so that we can have some future power for the Samurai. We have another branch over here we'll talk about in a minute. A lot of this is under dash connections. All of this will be cut off. This is a main branch feed that's going to go out and control the TPS, the map sensor, IAC, idle air control is what that is. And then this is what's called the DTC plug. This is really important. You locate this right away on the harness. You make sure that if you got a rubber hat, you keep it. But I'd say go for a good handful of wire. Cut that off. You're going to put this on later, so we want to cut him off. Okay. This particular harness has the map sensor. Now this is a manifold absolute pressure sensor. We don't need that on while we're doing the job, but these systems do require that, so make sure you have that. And one more thing I'm going for here, this guy right here, it's the square port scanner tool. If anybody ever can find a Suzuki one, because the mechanics had them at the shop, what I want you to do is send me one because they're really hard to find. So you're going to cut off that port scanner, and he's going to go with the DTC later. I like to move those into the cab because the way the factory did it is they put them outside in the weather, and I don't like that. This is something you want to go for when you're doing your removal of the harness. This is the plate for the coil pack. This is not a coil. And up top here you'll see this is the igniter. This is what all the TBI systems use in some of the early 16 valves. What we have right here is called the VSS. I'm showing you this one, it's wrong. Later we're going to show you the correct VSS. This is what come out of the donor cluster. Some people have modified these to fit the Samurai harness, but it was never intended for it. So I just like to do the factory stuff, so I don't use those. On the ECU, very important, you're going to break it down to just the case. You be very careful removing some of these tough screws because you can do damage to the circuit board inside if you don't have the proper tools to remove this. And maybe later I can show you a really cool tool to take these hard screws out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started on these branches. I'm going to do them kind of individually. So let's go ahead and get started over here on the branch that's going to handle the coil pack, O2 sensor, things like that, igniter. Okay, the way I want to do this today is let's see what we're going to keep. A lot of people ask me, you know, what's so important about this noise filter, so I'm going to explain this. The noise filter, it's got a brown and white wire, brown wire, black and green wire. What the noise sensor does in this case is it actually grounds the distributor and the coil pack. There's no ground otherwise, but at the same time it also generates on this brown wire the tack signal for the Samurai cluster. And so we're definitely going to keep the noise sensor. There's a small little wire here that went to the old, take a look at that. This is the connector that went to the brake fluid reservoir. If it was too low, it would go off. Well, you already have that on the Samurai, so we don't do redundancy, so we cut that guy off. This is the bottle that's up there. We're going to cut him off. This is, just to let you know, this is a yellow, blue, blue-red, blue-white, and by the way, blue-white's a really important color later on, but in this case it's not, and blue, so that's garbage. This guy comes off. Let's take a look at him. It's always a green connector, and in his case he's white and green, he's blue, green, and a ground wire. They always come off. Get rid of him. Pretty soon this is going to leave us just one more thing to cut off. I have no idea what this is. It's a purple and green wire, red and black. This was part of the wire that went to the switch on the brake fluid reservoir. He's gone. Now on this particular branch we've already completely cleaned it up as far as cutting off the connectors, but we'll come back later and get all these loose wires. But here's something you always need to look for. Again, almost all 8 valves are going to use this. It's going to be on every schematic, but sometimes they don't. So when you see these 2 bullet connectors, you have to get what's a condenser. Now we're out looking for a condenser right now, so we'll show you later where this condenser is. One of the wire colors that it uses is black and white. On a Suzuki, Samurai, Geo Tracker, Pontiac Sunrunner, and obviously the Suzuki Sidekick, black and white means ignition. And so that's an important wire, and this is where the condenser is going to go. So for that particular branch, we're all cleaned up. So what do we have? We have O2 sensor, coil pack, we have the ground, we have the noise suppressor NS filter, we have the condenser, we have the igniter. The igniter, super important if you want a spark. Orange wire, brown and white wire, and then a ground wire. And then finally, I like to ground them the way the factory does, because the engines are usually rubber mounted, so they don't vibrate, and so you actually have to ground to the firewall and ground to the block. Okay, let's get over here. The wires that we're looking at first are your main relay and your fuel pump relay. The main relay, very easy to find. It's got a big black and red wire. That is going to be 100% hot all the time, and when this relay is activated, it's going to power up all of the sensors with the blue and black wire. The other relay connector, very easy to identify, fuel pump relay. This has got your pink and black wire. You don't see a lot of pink and black in these harnesses, so it's very easy to find. And remember, it's by the ECU connector. In this case, this particular year, which covers pretty much 91 to 95, you're going to have a yellow and a green connector. So those I'm not cutting. This is going to allow me to cut off this connector, which has got the big green red wire in it and the big thick green wire. That connector's gone. Then we've got the another relay, probably for blinkers, gone. Okay, we want to come back to this later. This one here is completely off. Let's go with this connector here. Let's just hit a couple of big wires. We've got a green and white wire in the Suzuki's. That is brake, so that's easy to identify. We've got a thick blue and black wire. We've got orange and blacks. Typically orange and blacks and orange and whites are going to get cut out of here. So I can tell, especially with this white and green wire, this is not an important connector. It's gone. Next one, we have a little bit smaller connector. Now this is a pink-black, and just a second ago I said pink-black is definitely fuel pump. So that's where your fuel pump wire is going to go on the relay. We're going to extend that later and get through the firewall to hit our new external electric pump. So that connector is off. Okay, be very careful when you're looking at these kinds of plugs like this. I typically like to have these all plugged in so I don't cut off the wrong ones. So what I'm going to be doing is looking at these and seeing which ones do I keep and which ones do I not keep. So in this case, what I'm looking for is this violet yellow wire right here. This is a dead giveaway that this violet yellow wire, which is the cell circuit, which is check engine light, this does not go out into the engine compartment, so that means that this plug can come off. That's what I was looking for. It has other colors in there that do go out to the engine compartment, but that violet yellow doesn't. Then we have a little bit smaller connector that was also behind the dash, and the one I'm looking for in here is my brown wire, because this is what would have ran the tack before, and we have to now put that into the Samurai, so he's gone. Then we have a little connector here, green and white. What did I say? That's brake. So this is obviously the brake switch on the Sidekick. It's gone. And then here what we have, this must have been a manual transmission, because it is got like the clutch override, so we're going to get rid of that. Okay, again, these great big plugs like this, there's no way that we're going to be adapting these plugs over to the steering column on the Suzuki Samurai, so we're going to go ahead and cut off all of these. Okay, this is going to take me into one of the main branches of the engine compartment. This is one of your longer branches, and so I'm going to work my way down. What I'm going to cut off now is the connector that's in a lot of these. It's for future AC. If the car had AC or not, they just kind of get ready for it. So we have 4 pink wires. Some are different tracers. We just cut that off. And then as you can see, this one here, more AC stuff. Gone. Here's another one, multi-pinks, lots of tracers gone. Here's one with the ground and pink gone. Working our way out to the end. Alright, we're going into the engine compartment here. We can tell from the grommets. 2 very important connectors. Any connector that has green and yellow wire on it is a sensor connector. In this case, what we have here is red and green. That's an EGR temp sensor. Now, whenever you have 3 gray striped wires, that's probably going to be a map sensor, and that's what we have here. This is the map sensor connector. So I'm going to repeat this: gray green, gray yellow, gray red map sensor. So that's really important. Going further out in the harness, most of these are sensors. This is no doubt the most important branch here. Remember I talked about blue-white earlier? Well, here's the most important blue-white. TPS, throttle positioning sensor. That guy's got to stay, that entire plug. It's all computer controlled. Here we have a red and black with gray and yellow. This is going to be your air temp sensor connector. When you also have red with yellow stripe, green connector, this is your water temp. Now these 2 are telling the ECU the temperature of the air that's going in the engine and what the water temperature of the engine is. So as the engine heats up, you're going to notice that the idle comes down. Here what we have is the green and red wire, also another sensor. I'll tell you later what that is. And then the green and black tracer, that's your IAC, idle air control. That's a water operated, air operated switch. Further down, we're going to have the big connector for the big fuse block. We don't use that here, so we're going to cut that guy off. Now I say we don't use it, but in special applications, people ask me to keep that on for buggies and whatnot. I'll do that. Inside this particular harness, and you'll see this too, is you've got your water lines run with the harness. And I want to get this guy out now. This is the, okay, maybe not get him out now. The water line for windshield washer motor. Okay, that's going to take us down to just a few more things to cut here. So let's get out on this one. Here what we've got is the horn. We're not using the horn, so we're cutting him. This is the windshield washer bottle gone. Obviously we got that in the Samurai. And I don't want to quite hit the lights yet, I just want to hit the main things. Okay. So we're ready for the lights. Side marker light is a triangular connector. You got to be careful, not all triangular connectors are unimportant, but this one is. So let you know it's got the green and the yellow. which is obvious turn signal. Headlights on Sidekicks all the same. Typically they're 3-wire. We have a broken wire here, so they're going to be red, red and white, white and red, or blue and white. So the big connector's gone. There it is, that red wire we were just talking about. And in this case, we've got a connection for the transmission. These are always going to be, depending on if it's a tracker or a Sidekick, big or small connectors. In this case, it's a Suzuki. And so this one is a yellow-blue wire, blue-red wire, green wire, pink wire. That one's gone. We're not going to be talking to that transmission anymore. And that pretty much wraps up what you cut off. I want to concentrate on the fuse block. Whoops, forgot the flasher. We already have a flasher in the Samurai. Gonna need a knife. Oh, good. My beautiful assistant here is going to give me that one that was short on just a minute ago. Okay, this is also an engine compartment harness, and so we're going to get through all the wire here, clean this up a little bit. This one's important. This is a smart computer, so it's got a 3-wire distributor. So obviously we can't cut that off. And then we're going to have a couple of emissions valves on this particular model. Very easy to find, green and yellow, green and white, with a blue and black trace wire for the power. Those are the emission sensors we're keeping then. This will be identifiable to many of you. This is your alternator plug. Thank goodness Suzuki knows how to keep the same thing going. We have a white with a red wire, black and white wire. We already have an alternator plug in the Samurai, so we don't need it. Another wire that's redundant is yellow and white. The yellow and white wire is the water temp sensor for the CH gauge. Samurai has it, we don't need it. Samurai also has a starting system. It uses a black wire with a yellow tracer. Many of you have converted over to the clicky start fix. Hopefully you use Suzuki Creations, the original creator of that. Just tell Tom hi. Anyways, black wire, yellow tracer. Now why would we keep this one? Because on the fuel injected models it's different. On the fuel injected models there's no choke. So this computer needs to know when you're starting the car. So what it does is it uses the same wire that energizes the solenoid. It tells the computer to go rich momentarily, and the momentarily is simply as when you let go, it stops being full rich. So we need to keep this. Very easy wire to put in. Later we'll show you. You just simply join this to the original black wire with the yellow tracer in the Samurai. And here we have one more transmission connector. All right. Easy to tell, orange, black, orange, white, those are tracer colors, a solid blue, and then of course the wonderful red and yellow. This is how Samurai identifies the reverse light. So this is a manual transmission car. We don't need that, it's already on the Samurai. So what that's going to leave us over here is looking for, now this one's broke, happens a lot, the yellow with the black wire, that's your oil pressure sensor. We don't need it because the Samurai has the yellow-black wire for its idiot light. So please put in a real oil pressure sensor and a real water temp sensor later on. To keep going here, what I like to show on the fuse block is how important it is to keep it. Some of the Samurais we see, the fuse blocks are really melted. So I just want to open this up a little bit for you. Getting on the fuse block right now is really important, and I'm the only one that uses the fuse block, and there's a reason for that. A lot of the times the cars come in here, we find the fuse boxes have been overburdened. So we don't want to add the ECU memory to the dome light. We don't want the ignition wires to, that are powering your rock lights to now come in and try to run this EFI system. So that's why we use the second fuse block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through this particular one because they're all the same. I'm going to tell you what wires to keep as I go through here. So the first wire that I pulled out of here was the black wire with the red tracer. There's only one. This is your main relay. It only goes from the fuse block to the main relay. So we're not going to cut him. We got to keep him. Now this next one is a white and black. That's a white wire with the black tracer. We're not keeping him. Here we have a blue wire, no tracer. We're not keeping him. Green wire, not keeping him. Going through, we come into one of our main wires now. This is your ignition on wire, and it's a little hard. It's either blue with the black tracer, because it's about 50-50, or it's black with the blue tracer. We are going to cut him because that's what we're going to use to feed the key on portion of the fuse block. Here we have a solid white wire. We're going to keep him, cut him. Then we have a green and white wire, cut. We have a great big white and yellow, cut. Digging in here, we have another white and yellow, cut. Getting down to just a few wires here. We have a yellow and a green, cut. Green with the red, cut. And have a number of yellow wires. I don't even have to look. We're just going to cut all the yellow wires. All right, now we're getting down there. We just have a few wires. So let's again go over and see what they are. I've got my keepers in here and I've got a few more to cut. Black and white. Said it earlier, that's ignition, so we're not going to cut him. We've got a white with a green tracer, definitely cut him. We've got a white with a red, it's a cut. Black and red tracer, main relay, going to keep him. And then white and blue, that's our last wire. Now what this is going to do is it's going to leave us only 3 wires on the fuse block. They are white. It's typically going to have 2 brown tracers on the white wire that run perpendicular. We're going to have the black with the red tracer, and we're going to have our ignition, which is black with the white tracer. So what I always do at this point now is I look at the fuse block and I pull out the fuses I don't need. So I come to the back, put my finger where that fuse is. That was the wrong fuse, by the way. It needs to be a 15 amp fuse. That's all that the factory wants. And so we're going to pull out all the other fuses except for main relay, right here, black with red, ignition, which is going to be right here. And so this is what this particular fuse block looks like. It's going to have main relay, it's going to have ignition, it's going to have ECU memory. Now we have a little bit of work to do here to clean up all of the wires in the harness, but for the most part everything's already been cut. Now we just have to clean it up before we start. harnesses is the emissions connections. They're melted, and so we've bared this harness just to show you the damage here. Why this occurs is because they're running a ground wire real tight inside here so that these sensors work better. I like to use the Samurai ground, which is right by the thermostat housing, and get rid of this melting wire here. Now all of this will show you repaired later. Your blue and black wires come off the main relay, power all the sensors, said that earlier. So we're going to cut those out. What we're looking to save is the green with the yellow tracer and the green with the white tracer. Those are for your emissions, the purge, and the vac valve. And so we'll show you this in a few minutes with all new connectors on it, all cleaned up. Back. This is my Zuk's Off-Road. I've got a couple things to show you. Specifically, remember that burnt wire? I've repaired all of that. I didn't need to get you into the mundane details, but I am going to show you how I like to solder things. One of the most important things I talked about earlier was the DTC plug to get it out of the weather engine compartment and get it inside the cab. So I do that with the port scanner and also the DTC. So what I do when I solder is I take the wires and mechanically twist them. This is super, super strong. So you can see that the wires are actually twisting around each other. I always use shrink wrap tubing, high quality. So when I come in here with my soldering gun, we make sure that we've got solder on both sides. Let it cool off for just a second and go ahead and slide on the shrink wrap tubing, which I have to pull up there, and then of course we'll come in there with the match later when we do all of them. So there's the DTC plug. I've relocated that in, and next time you see this, it's going to all be wrapped up, so we're going to cover some other bases. Your yellow wire on your schematic for your VSS, vehicle speed sensor, I like to use a disconnect so that what we can do is disconnect the cluster. So there it is, male and female. We've got it on there, so you see I can disconnect the cluster. This will be coming out of the cluster, and I need to get the right cripper, but we'll go ahead and go on to the next phase. Here we've already connected the main relay and the fuel pump relay, and what I like to use is the little bracket that was on the ECU, so the next time you see this you're going to see that bracket, so we can secure that in underneath the dash. We don't need any more noises in that nice quiet Samurai that we drive. The fuse block, as you can see, we've already wrapped up the main relay, black and red, the ECU memory, the white, and the ignition, but we haven't soldered anything here, so I'm going to need a close-up of how we've bridged these different wires. What we're going to do is give you 4 key-on switches, or excuse me, key-on power fuse lines, and we're going to give you 4 constant power lines. And the way we do that is we'll cut and come over and connect to these solid bridges, and I will be soldering those. But that's going to be done in the next phase. I also want to bring you back to that pink and black wire, which was short because it went through with the other part of the harness. What I've done here is just add any color wire, and I'm going to solder this on before I stick it through the firewall grommet, because we got to get external to run a positive wire to the fuel pump. So I wanted to show you that. Another thing I want to show you is the S1 port scanner. Even though this tool is almost impossible to find, I still like the idea of keeping it factory. And so here I want to go over the 3 colors. You have a ground, you have the same white wire, and it's the same fuse as the ECU memory, and then you have a new wire we haven't talked about yet. This is a deep purple with a deep green. You'll see it as the diagnostic code wire on the schematic that we're going to provide you. And so again, that's going to be inside the cab. Another wire that I want to show you is the tach signal wire. This originates from the noise filter, but it also gives the Hall effect, H-A-L-L, Hall effect to the ECU. So it actually goes to the ECU. And so this is why you have two wires from the factory joined into one. And I wanted to show you that before we taped it up so you didn't have to call me and ask me why are there two wires on the tach signal. Alright, so the next time you see that, we're going to have that all buttoned up and ready to install in the car. And finally, what we're going to show you here is that condenser. It finally showed up, and so simple bullet connector it in, and there your condenser is. So again, if you have the speed billet connectors that are black and white and green and black, you must have a condenser. You just simply can't cut off the connectors. The factory's telling you they need that. Alright, we'll wrap this up and we'll be installing it in the car next. Okay, this is our completed harness. Everything's been repaired. Typically what I'll do when you send your harness in to me is I'm going to take the time to go over every single wire on the schematic and do what's called a tone check. Now a tone check is done with the Fluke meter specifically. It's my favorite brand. And simply by touching the two probes together, you can get an audible tone. In this case, it's get the batteries low, so it's not that loud, but I can hear it. So I would go through each and every connector on the circuit all the way out so that I can make sure I don't have any problems when I put it in the car. So I'm going to give you an example here. What I want to do is I want to check the charging system wire, which I talked to you before. Now, it isn't charging the battery because all that's on your Samurai. What this is doing is it's charging the injector in cold weather on startup, and this is why you can take an EFI car, turn the key, put it in gear and take off. By far the best system in the world for us off-roaders. And so what I'm doing here is I'm taking the probe, I'm holding it on one end of this black wire with the yellow tracer, and I'm just looking for it here. And oh, I see what I'm going to do. I'm going to look there on the schematic, see what number it is, just like you will when you have it. And what I'm going to do is touch these two, got a tone, and so there you go. That's how you tone out to make sure that every connection's correct. Next is VSS. Dealing with the Samurai cluster today, we're lucky we got a tach cluster. So I just want to show you, we're going to remove only the two screws. So there's the two screws out, and we're just going to lift the face off, set that over there. Be careful, some of those have glass in them, and we don't have all the parts anymore. So what we're going after is the Speedo to put in the VSS, which I've got both of them here, the plastic and the metal. And so what we're going to do is turn this around, and what we're going after is this Speedo. So we're going to take out the one screw for the American switch. It's called an American switch because it's red, white, and blue, but really it's only in America. The USA Suzuki crowd wanted a way to get people to come into the dealership so that they could get some service money on the Suzukis, and so they put in a micro switch counter, which I'm going to show you in a second. And so a sensor light would come on and people would panic, drive to the dealer, and the dealer of course found a whole bunch of things wrong, and really all it was is the micro switch turns on that light that says check sensor every 30,000 miles. So at the end of this there's a little hidden black switch. The dealer would flip the switch, charge you to change the oil and all that, and then everything would be fine for another 30,000 miles. So what we're going to do with the Speedo is be super careful with it, and we're going to remove the micro switch counter ground and take that out of the way. I need to explain to you what is so unusual about the Suzuki Samurai is that before there was fuel injected cars, Samurai in their speedometer put a magnet, so when you spin the drum here you'll see a little piece of red paint. Now we can give you a close-up of that, but there's no reason to. You can actually see that. That's where the magnet is. This is what's called the reed switch. We know it as a VSS or vehicle speed sensor. Inside this glass vacuum container there's two metal connectors that are so close together that when a magnet passes, it pulls some atoms off the magnet. It pulses from, it jumps from one piece of metal to the other, and that's what creates a vehicle pulse, speed pulse. So in other words, the faster you're going, the faster the magnet's going around, the computer knows how much to load the injector. So here's what's really wonderful for us is that before they had fuel injected motors, they already put in the magnet and they already put in the slots. And so as you're going to see here in a second, it really helps if I put it in correctly. But as you're going to see in a second, it snaps in. Problem is that they didn't drill the holes correctly, and this is where you can ruin your speedometer by trying to put in the VSS screws, which are special screws. So whenever you obtain your VSS, make sure you get plenty of screws. You only need 2. You're going to have to drill out these 2 holes. So using a number 36 drill, what we need to do is set it down on the table, and we need to go into the 2 holes without ruining the speedo. So I'm going to go ahead and snap that guy back in where he's going to go now. And I want to let you know, some people out there have been modifying the wrong VSS. This is a white plastic VSS that you'll find in the Geo Trackers and Sidekicks. Don't try this. It really doesn't work very well because you have to cut the metal that the pulse is going to come on. It's much, much better to use the actual metal VSS. And so now that we've drilled that, I've prepped a couple of wires here. The first wire that we're going to use is a yellow wire. The yellow wire is going to come out on the end here, and the screw is going to hold the yellow wire on. And then the ground wire for the VSS, I've prepped that, is going to come over here. And what you want to make sure is that your wires and your connectors do not touch either positive or negative. Once you have that in, you're going to go ahead and put this back, and you're going to install it, put it all back together again. Now what I do to start this process is I'll go ahead and bring in the ends of my yellow, and I use yellow because the factory uses yellow. I'm going to come in through the hole of the American switch on this side, and then on the back side of these I've got a ground lug for the black wire, and I've got the blue bullet wire, the speed disconnect that I showed you earlier when we were doing the harness. So next we look at this, it's going to be assembled. Okay, here we go, finished speedo. I've already got the ground for the micro switch in, and I want to make sure that there's an air gap between the ground screw and this ground, even though they're both grounds. And as you can see, I'm going to give a little test wiggle. I've got both of my screws in perfectly because, again, 36 drill. Really important drill set there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to feed all of these wires through, being super, super careful. Oh my goodness, I could share a secret with you. A lot of you guys do gears and then you complain about how that the speedometer's off. And I keep telling people these are adjustable. So let me look real quick here and show you where the lever is. Okay, finally found it. Right here, in fact I'm going to take this out, that's why I couldn't find it. Right here is a little tooth lever. Now normally there's white paint on here. You'll find that a lot on the Suzuki stuff. So anyways, you can move that lever, and I'm just going to push that lever the other way just so you can see it move, and that's how you can affect how the speedometer works so that at the higher RPM, higher mileage, you're not going to be off. But what it did is it adjusted where it rested 0. So if you were 5 miles off, which this car is, what we did is we adjusted it so now the needle rests at 5. And that means it's going to be accurate up here at 55 where he can get a ticket in a 35. And so he needs to know. And so that's that lever. It's right behind the ground for the micro switch. Thought I would share a little tidbit with you on that one. So now what we're going to do is be very careful, and what we're going to do is milk all the cables through. We don't want any of these cables to get in the way of this laying flat inside of its housing. So what we need to do is tuck some of these behind here. Make sure we're going to match which way it goes in, so we don't put it in upside down. And I'm slowly going to set it down in there, and then I'm pulling on where the speedometer cable connects to it to make sure I can pull it all the way and then flat. And I see that I'm flat, so I'm going to come over here now. Make sure that is where it's supposed to be. Hold that and put in my one screw up here to hold the speedo, and then I'll do the American 3 wires the same way. So this is ready to install and plug into the computer to give the computer the VSS pulse. Very simple to do, very easy to screw up. So be very careful that you don't break the speedo. And the next thing we'll show you is the wiring harness going in the car. One of the hardest things that people get involved with the Samurai motor is stabbing the distributor, because most of us grew up with Chevys and so we think there's one top dead center, but in reality the Suzuki Samurai's got 2 top dead centers. It's a pumper motor. 1 and 4 they're up, 2 and 3 are down, just like a Harley Davidson motor. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the lower sprocket on 0 on the timing cover, and then I'm going to physically check and see which rocker arms are loose, because if one intake and one exhaust are loose, that means that both the valves are closed. That means it's ready to fire, and I'm going to stab the distributor to number 1. So let me go ahead and do that now. I've already set the lower pulley to be on 0, but this is what I was talking about, 2 top dead centers. I'm going to check back here on number 4, and number 4 is tight, both intake and exhaust. I come up here to number 1, and I've got both loose. The only time that this occurs again, I've already mentioned it, but it's important, when both valves are closed, the rockers will be loose, it's ready to pop fire. So we're going to go ahead and stab the distributor to number 1 cylinder. Electrical distributor, EFI TBI, it's a 3-wire connector. We've already determined that we're going to stab this for number 1. I could have done it on number 4 just as easy, as long as these rockers were loose, but they're not. So what I'm going for, stabbing this distributor, is I want to be in the center of the bolt hold down, but I also want to be right on number 1 post. So it's just a question of moving it in or out, turning it a little bit, and then seeing where it lines up with the cap. So right there I think I'm pretty good. Here's number 1. We're going to be right there. So where I want to be is right here, just where I'm at. So we're ready to fire this guy as soon as the harness is in. Okay, we're going to do the block off plate now. These are available from Zuk's Off-Road, a little company out here in Arizona. And what we do is we just rub that, and that's why I got the glove on, because I want to keep working. So we get that on both sides. I like to call that milking the nitties. But anyways, that guy's going to go onto the studs there, our block off plate. And we're going to be able to apply gasoline to that. Excuse me, there will be no more gas because it's a block off plate, but you'll be able to apply oil to that immediately. So we're just going to put the nuts on, tighten it up, and we're going to proceed getting that intake manifold on now. Okay, typical intake for a TBI, definitely recognizable. It's only got 1 hole, not 2 holes like a Clark 1.3. The cool thing is that the 1.6 intake bolts onto the 1.3. We've already applied the gasket material to the Zuk's Off-Road intake manifold gasket. Many of you know I own that die, so if you need good gaskets, high quality gaskets, they're only $1.47. And that's 1 at a time, so I'm not sure it's the best way to buy them, but we've got them. So there we go, we're going to bolt this guy on and start running the valve cover top and electrical, and we'll have a lot more in a few minutes. We've been getting a lot of stuff knocked out. Now it's time to actually get the harness in the car. This is a 3-wire from the factory, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I've said it many times, I really like to stick with the factory. So let's take a look at the long whip that's going to go behind the dash. This one's really simple. It's got the map sensor on it and the EGR temp sensor. Let's identify those. 3 gray striped wires, and then the red, green with the gray and yellow, which is another gray striped wire. When that comes out of the grommet, that's telling me that this is the passenger side behind the battery grommet. That leaves 2 grommets, and we're going to break this down into 2 whips. We're going to break it down into the firewall whip, just like the factory. Here you're going to have your coil pack, O2 sensor, condenser, some ground wires, noise filter, and our idle up for factory power steering. The other grommet is going to be all the way onto the other side of the motor. It's going to be distributor, rich lane, and a couple of missions connectors. So in just a few minutes we should have this installed in the car. Alright, we're going to be talking a little bit about the electric fuel pump. In this case we're using one of my favorites. This is from AutoZone. It's made by AirTech. It's called the E-2000. Just consider it a Ford F-150 pump. Now, do check in with me regularly because we're looking for a different pump with brass fittings, because these are the Ford quick release, but they really work good if you can push the hose on far enough and put on a clamp. So we're just looking for that change. What you see here is the pump is wrapped in one of my products. No nasty name for this, it's just a fuel pump platform. We provide the caps and of course the force protect screws and the clamps, but the E-2000 comes with the isolation blanket and then a rubber casing. So it's really isolated well. Now I've already installed the ground cable, and we're going to put the ground cable under one of the tech screws so that at one swoop we've taken care of a couple little items there. One thing about e-pumps you need to know, it has to be high pressure, and that's what this pump is for the fuel injection system. But being a DC pump, it's very easy to wire backwards. So right up here where the electrical connections are, it's going to be hard to see in the video, but you've got a plus and a minus sign. So in my instructions on my harness, I'm always going to show the plus on that fuel pump pink black wire, and that's where it goes, is to the plus. Otherwise you'll never prime this pump. As soon as you put fuel in it, turn it on, it's going to put all the pump back into the fuel into the tank. And so there we go. We're going to show this installed in just a few minutes. Let's do it. You see how these 2 ports are pretty close together?
Yes.
Okay, I don't like short hoses like that, because that's how you blow out fuel injection hose, is if you got an elbow that's in a tight loop. So what I do a lot of times is I'll actually go into the body here, I'll turn left, I'll make a nice little round circle and come back. And that way it has room to expand and move around when it loads up with its charge of high pressure.
In order to miss these holes, I'm gonna have to, I can't put it on the center of the beam.
That's correct, you cannot.
Okay.
Yeah, but there is metal where you can hit metal 4 times.
Yeah, I see now.
And we need every one.
Okay.
Okay. I was asked to kind of show you one wire here, and I'll be very brief. This is the fuel pump wire. Originally it was pink black out of the fuel pump relay. We come out of one of the 2 grommets over here, exterior, because that relay's inside now. Come over to this side, get away from the heat from the exhaust manifold. And what we're going to do is extend a wire on it, come down here by the heater valve, and we're going to zip tie it all the way along the frame to the electric fuel pump. What we need to do when we put this in here is we need to get it in deep enough so that we can get the air ducts back in. But the most important thing is to get it angled like this, because all you need to do is depress the clutch and see that the lever's on the right hand side. So if you put it in straight, you're going to hit the ECU, which is going to cause you problems. You're going to have to redo the work. And so it's very critical. Make sure that you get it back far enough, and then also make sure that it's a little tilted. And so it's going to go in there, it's just going to go a little bit deeper. Once I have where it's going to go, I'll make a little mark, pull it back out, take the ECU off, get it away, and I'll weld that bracket in. There you go.